Hi, my name's Todd, and today I'm going to talk with you about my perception and my insight into what's going on with the present U.S.-China relations. And that also will include a little bit about the situation in Xinjiang and what's going on with H&M. So hang around and I'll be right back. First off, I want to share with you a little bit just about my background and why I have the insight and the background to be able to speak to this situation. I started speaking Mandarin Chinese in the 1970s, in the late 1970s. And in the mid-1980s, I moved to Taiwan. I lived in Taiwan for a year and a half. Then I moved to Hong Kong. I lived in Hong Kong for about 8 months. And then I moved to mainland China. And I spent about 18 years in mainland China. And that includes working for foreign corporations, working in the cross-cultural negotiations, interpreting, meetings, things like that, working with officials, U.S. officials, along with the Chinese officials in joint ventures. And also, I have a bachelor's degree in language and literature from a Chinese university. Many of my Chinese friends say that they haven't ever heard another foreigner who speaks the language like I do. I'm not trying to brag. This is really awkward for me because it's not at all what I like to do. But in American culture, it's important that we push ourselves forward, and I understand that. And so I'm forcing myself to feel a little bit uncomfortable. But I am sharing with you the vast reality of what's going on here and where I'm coming from. I don't speak to my Chinese friends in English. We only speak in Chinese. When I'm speaking with the Chinese, they will say, I forget that you're Chinese. I forget that you're not Chinese. I feel like I'm speaking with a Chinese person. Over the phone, basically, they just can't figure out if I'm from the north or the south. So that having been said, that gives me great insight into what's going on between the U.S. and China, is because you can tell right now that I'm an American. I'm speaking English just like you do if you're an American. If the NSA offered me a position as a Chinese language instructor, I went through the background check. I went through the testing, the DLPT-5, Defense Language Proficiency Test. I passed it. They were impressed. They wanted me. But I decided not to take the opportunity because it seemed like that was for three years ago. That was there were too many weird things going on. I didn't feel comfortable with that. And also, honestly, I was told that I would be coming in as a low man on the totem pole, and that it would take time to work up. And I know that they have a lot of Chinese nationals or Chinese-born U.S. citizens working there, and I also just didn't feel like getting involved with that cultural stuff because it can be exhausting. And I did grow up in the U.S. For the most part. I did all of my studies outside of my bachelor's degree in the U.S. I also have a master's degree in education. And I have a lot of experience interacting with many different levels of Chinese society, and I also lived in Inner Mongolia, which is a autonomous region of a minority group. And I also experienced a lot of the situations going on there, some of the ethnic challenges, and also just some of the things that are so easily misconstrued and misunderstood from our cultural perspective. And this is the one thing that I think is the most important, is that we cannot use our culture to understand China. It will only send us off in all sorts of very bad and misconstrued directions. The people that you're using really and truly have the skill sets you need, and do you know the skill sets that you need, that they need to have? Do you know they need to be coming from your educated background, from your upbringing, from your background, and then have gone over there and learned it from an outsider's perspective to the point that they've become an insider linguistically and culturally? At that point, you're going to have somebody who's able to help you figure this out, walk through it, maneuver it, and come out successfully. So if you're looking for somebody like that, look me up. There again, like I said, I don't usually say this stuff, but I am in this video because in this video, I'm being that pushy, boisterous American versus that more like laid back and just, okay, I'm just not going to say anything, sort of a Chinese personality. And so if you're looking for somebody who can really help you figure this stuff out, if you're in the government, if you're in a company, and if you're just concerned about this, you're like H&M and you're like, well, I don't like all the stories I'm hearing. I'd really like to know what's going on. Well, get in touch with me and let's talk about going over and finding out what's going on and getting to the bottom of this. Because right now, there's too much hearsay, there's too many stories, and there's too many people who don't really know what's going on. So I want to start this out a little bit by just sharing what I feel is one of the biggest problems that we have going on between the U.S. and China right now, and that's the lack of diplomacy. And so I went online and I found at the UN, there's a class called UN Fundamentals of Diplomatic Protocol. And what it's about is acquiring knowledge and skills for being an effective modern-day diplomat at the United Nations. Now, I feel like this is a really good place to start. And so what are the objectives of this course? So it says here, upon successful completion of this course, participants will, 1, describe the general principles of diplomacy and protocol etiquette and the current trends in the area. 2, identify principles and best practices for organizing visits and events by following simple but fundamental procedures, as well as practical aspects of social occasions, including invitations, attendance, and seating plans. So we're talking about interactions with people here. Number 3, recognize the elements which make an event a success or a failure. And this is very important. That means that you need to have cultural insight. You need to have cultural finesse. You need to have the ability to know what is the proper way to treat people and what are the things that you should not do. Number 4, explain the principles of protocol and etiquette within the UN family. There again, United Nations. That is the epitome of a place where we need diplomacy and where a person will learn skill sets of diplomacy. Number 5, develop excellent networking and contact making skills. That's a social network. We're talking about social skills. We're talking about cultural skills. We're talking about skill sets to be able to understand what's the best way to be successful in networking and building the relations that we need in order to be successful at what we're doing. So recently, I think everybody is aware of the situation that happened in Alaska. And I think that Secretary of State's Blinken's cultural faux pas are a sign of a secretary green behind the ears, especially when it comes to China. Who's he listening to? Or is he listening to anyone? That would be my question. There's no show of diplomacy or interest in wanting to work things out. And it sort of reminds me of, when we invite the Chinese to Alaska, I mean, we were just in Japan and Korea. We couldn't have just gone over to Beijing. No, I'm sorry. You must come to Alaska. And so we bring them to Alaska and we, as the news says it, within 30 seconds insult them. And then we don't offer them anything to eat. And this is just like, I'm sorry, but that's just like, what's going on here? So what do I have in my head? I see the little school bully who walks up to some kid and throws his lunch on the ground and walks away. And that's like, no, you're not going to eat. Why should I feed you? Why should you eat? What right do you have to eat? You're at my house. Why should I feed you? And so then what happens is, well, you have the good kids who come to the rescue and, it's like, you can't treat people like that. But unfortunately, with a lack of diplomacy and diplomatic skills and working with people who understand the cultural idiosyncrasies that are going on here, things are going to be really difficult and really challenging. And we can see that right now, that if Blinken does not even understand the base value set of the Chinese culture to know that food is one of the most important things and ways to show interest, concern, and caring for another person. The base value of food in China is something much different than we understand here. Inviting somebody to your home and not feeding them in China is absolutely an insult. There is nothing that it's like saying, I don't like you, I don't want to have anything to do with you, and leave, essentially. It's like, but I'm not saying it to your face. I'm just doing it through the motions of just not giving you any food. Because if I don't give you food, you're going to wonder why. You're going to go, what did I do? What did I say? Why did he or she not feed me when I went to their home? Especially if it was at a meal time. I mean, it's like, no, if you're going in between meals and you don't get fed, that's different. But you're still going to get tangerine oranges or snacks or something, and you're going to get something to drink too. Even if you say, no, thank you, you're still going to get it, because no is a polite way to say, I'm not going to act like I really want it because that would be rude. So I am going to trust in your diplomatic skill sets and your cultural skill sets to know that it is your job to give me the food or give me the drink, even though I didn't ask for it, or even though I said, no, I'm fine, I don't care for it. And so this is a very serious thing with the Chinese culture. If you invite people from China to your home, to your country, then you are the person who is responsible at certain points when you're with them during meal hours to feed them. That is a simple given in Chinese society. When we do not do that, we are expressing really, really low interest in expanding the relationship, or even the basic decency of saying, we can look beyond all of that other stuff. We'll deal with that. But right now we need to eat, and we need to get to know each other on a personal basis. Just like I asked Secretary of State Blinken to please watch Secretary of State Schultz's interview recently about his insights in being successful with China. And I will put a link to that here so that you can watch it. It's very short, but he gives very, very insightful wisdom from his experience on the best ways to be successful with China. It just seems that Secretary of State Blinken is not going in that direction. And I'm sorry for that. I think he's more interested in tweeting out and getting doing his tweets every day about this, that, and the other thing, rather than actually learning about, maybe going and taking this course at the UN, learning about what's going on. What are the best ways to be a diplomat? What are the best ways to create positive and mutually beneficial relationships to be able to move the globe forward? So that's how I feel about Blinken. I think he really needs to find some people to work with who can help him be successful, because right now he's not doing a very good job. Obviously, the base that he's speaking to is all pumped up because, it's just that it's that adrenaline. You say something to somebody I don't like, and I'm like, yeah, go for it. Well, but that's not necessarily the way diplomacy works. Sometimes we need to go beyond our own base caveman emotions and start looking at things from an educated and just a really grounded place. And once we can get to that educated, informed, grounded place, then maybe we'll be able to find the way to bridge. Bridging means going from one side to the other and meeting halfway, sort of like it's not, bridging that I'm building you a bridge to come over here, but rather I'm building a bridge, you're building a bridge, and we meet halfway. How can we work through this situation? How can we find success? Because right now things aren't moving in a good direction. And the further we push, the harder we push, the worse things are going to get, because the Chinese have a sense of pride just like the Americans. And so if we can't respect each other's sense of pride, each other's integrity, and each other's ways of doing things by understanding, not by judging, and that's all we're doing right now is judging, then we're going to have a hard time moving forward. So we really need to maybe take a deep breath and relax, get a little more oxygen in our lungs and into our brain, and be able to move forward in a good way. Because right now, it seems like things are getting a little bit stressed, and that's not a good direction to go. So recently, the New York Times News, there was an article, and it's H&M faces boycott in China over stance on treatment of Uyghurs. So this just is a really good follow-up to what I was talking about here. The fashion retailer H&M is facing a potential boycott in China after a statement the company made last year expressing deep concerns over reports of forced labor in Xinjiang stirring a social media storm this week. That's quoted by the New York Times. So the forced labor thing is something that there is a lot of talk about, and yes, some supposed Uyghur people have come out and spoken who are in another country. Are they really Uyghurs? Are they? I mean, there's a lot of questions here. I'm not saying they are. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying, can we really trust those things? We need to really use our knowledge base, our ability to differentiate critical thinking. This is a very important skill set right now. So I did see the BBC journalist report from inside a supposed labor camp in Xinjiang. And it was a few months back, and he was doing video, and he had a Chinese woman who was interpreting for him, and they were all speaking Mandarin. And he interviewed a Uyghur man who was speaking Mandarin too, and he asked him a few questions. And I heard the Uyghur man's response in Chinese, in Mandarin, and he was not acting in any way like he was pressured. He was very relaxed. He was saying very clearly that, everything is really fine, everything's good. And then his basic response after getting the interpretation, which he didn't like, it wasn't what he wanted to hear, he said, well, he probably was under pressure, or, he was being forced, he was afraid to say what he really wanted to say. Why would somebody be afraid to say what they want to say? I mean, give me a break. I lived in China for 20 years. The Chinese will say what they want to say. And then he walked us through, we were looking at, the area where they were there, and it looked fine. It looked like a normal place in China, in a school and someplace. Then we went into the dorm where they were staying. And the dorm looked just like a university dorm. I mean, I've been in a lot of Chinese university dorms. I went to university in China, and I thought that actually looked nicer than some of the university dorms that I was in, that I visited friends in and went into. And they were the bunk beds, which is very typical in a university dorm. I think there were 4. I remember going into one in where I was going to university. There were 8. And then the shower area, which was sort of like the toilet, and then there's the shower over the toilet, which is very typical in China. A lot of homes have those. And he was making it out as if it was like something out of a, this is just like, it's a prison or it's a jail cell or something. No, it's not. It was a very typical looking dormitory. So when you don't have the background information to interpret things, you misinterpret them. You interpret them from your own worldview and the pictures that you have in your mind of what your world is like, and you see their world and you say, oh, well, that looks like a jail. Well, maybe it does to you, and maybe in your country that's what a jail is like. But in that country, that is not what a jail is like. That was a dormitory, and a dormitory in China is not like a dormitory in the U.S., which is like a motel room, or even maybe a low-scale hotel room. We have it pretty good, but that doesn't mean that all countries have the same quality and the same standards or the same needs. So in the article, it goes on to say Huang Xuan, a Chinese actor who had a menswear contract with H&M, posted a statement saying he would quit the deal, adding that he opposed, quote-unquote, slander and creating rumors, as well as, quote-unquote, any attempt to discredit the country. The singer and actress Victoria Song also used to endorse H&M, also released a statement saying that she no longer had a relationship with the brand, and that national interest is above all else. And that's from the New York Times. So we have people who are coming out, the average people, just like we in the U.S. have people from Hollywood coming out and saying things against certain situations. Well, now we have the same situation in China, coming out and saying that, this is unfounded, this is not right. And I believe that they would probably feel that it would be important for people to actually go over and understand the situation from a position of what's the norm for within the country and the values from within the country. And this is something that I understand because I did live in a minority region for 4 years going to school. I also do speak the language fluently. I understand what people are saying around me. I understand the intentions. I understand the cultural significances and the cultural nuances that are going on. And I am able to maneuver these situations in a way to be able to come out with the best outcome for both sides, meaning that it's a diplomatic way of looking at things. It's not one-sided. It's considering both sides and understanding the differences and the areas that are so easily misunderstood and misconstrued. But when people who are misconstruing and misunderstanding are willing to listen to their own and recognize their own misunderstandings, then it's really very difficult. Then we're getting into the childish situation. We're getting into the teenager mindset where it's like, well, I already know everything, right? I'm 20, I'm 19. I already understand everything. And then when you get to be 30, you're like, oh, well, maybe I didn't understand anything. And then when you get 40, it's like, wow, I really didn't understand anything. And then 50, it's like, boy, was I stupid. But unfortunately, we're dealing with that mindset now. They're just like, we know everything. We know everything. There's nothing else to be known because we already know it. Actually, I've spoken with some Chinese friends about this, and they're just sort of like, what's going on? You know, what's with it? It's like, why is all of this happening? Well, unfortunately, it's happening because of what I just said, which is now, you know, it's like the mindset of a teenager. It's like, we know everything. We're the best, and nobody else can be as good, and nobody else knows as much as we do. And so that's where all of this is coming from. So I have a really hard time when I'm talking to my Chinese friends to try and say, hey, you know, this is how we see the world. I even have a Chinese friend who said, you know, he said, I was really wondering, you know, is this possible? And he thought, well, you know, at one point in our history it would have been, but now it's not. This isn't possible. And I think in America we can say that there are things in our history that have happened that at one point in our history, those are things that could have happened. Today, not really. And those things also happen to minorities, not to white people. And so I think that there are certain things that even today that happened back then are going on. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's going on in our country, but there are a lot of things that could never happen again. And I think that this is sort of a situation where we're looking at you know, what's going on in Xinjiang. Is this the way it sounds, or is it just the way it's being interpreted by people like the BBC journalist who goes there and does interviews, who doesn't understand China, he doesn't understand Chinese, he doesn't know what's going on, and all he can do is take his own mental images from what it's like in Great Britain and throw them onto China and say, oh no, that's not, that this can't be right. This is much, much less than what it should be from my perspective. You know, so we need to have that perspective ability to be able to look at something. Blinken needs to have the perspective ability to know that his actions have meaning in the Chinese culture in ways that maybe he doesn't understand. We all need to understand those things, because until we come to understand those things or work with people who do understand those things, we will not make any positive progress. And I hope that we can make positive progress in this situation soon. If anybody has a need for somebody who would be willing to go with them to visit Xinjiang, to go through and visit some of these people, to talk with these people, to talk with people, find out what's going on in an honest and open way, to be willing to really understand what's going on, to really pull away and say, okay, this is what we're seeing, and has somebody who's able to help them interpret the cultural situations rather than just the words, leaving you at your own demise of trying to interpret what you're seeing when you don't have the cultural background to understand what you're seeing, and you're only able to misinterpret it through your own culture. Then you need somebody like me. And I would be more than happy to work with you and to go with you. Just contact me. I will go over with you. I will help you with interpreting, translating the language, the culture, how to get your brain around what's going on that you may be misinterpreting, how to help you better interpret, or how to even ask, what is this that we're seeing that we think looks like that? I think this is a really important skill set. There again, we're coming back to, we need to get the facts. We need to start using critical thinking skills. We need to have proper cross-cultural skills for the cultures we're dealing with. You can't deal with somebody who has an overall cross-cultural insight and then expect them to be able to go and deal with China and be successful. It won't happen. You need to have specialists. You need to have people who understand the culture, who understand the language from your cultural background. And I'm talking about American-born people who have the skill sets in dealing with China, who have the language skills for dealing with China. I'm not talking about Chinese people who came to America, emigrated, and then learned English in the US, learned the US in the US. That's not the same thing. Your perspectives are backwards. So thanks for listening. I hope you have a great day, and talk to you later.